Hi, I'm Nicole Ozdowski. I'm a PhD candidate at Northern Arizona University, and I'd like to talk to you today about our preliminary results regarding environmental effects on space-weathered lizardite grains. Next slide, please. So I won't belabor this point, but space weathering processes can alter the surface composition of small airless bodies. For the purpose of this talk, I'll be focusing primarily on solar wind irradiation, namely simulating solar wind irradiation in the laboratory using low-energy ions. Next slide, please. So this study expands on a 2008 study by Contando et al. That found that sample preparation methods could chemically alter space-weathered samples. They conducted this study in response to a discrepancy in reported magnesium abundance in space-weathered olivine samples. The group hypothesized that this discrepancy in magnesium abundance was a result of some groups washing their irradiated samples in water for further analysis, again, after irradiation. And this is an example of one of their experiments. They decided to study magnesium abundance using X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. So the larger plot that you see is a survey scan using XPS of an olivine sample. But mostly I'd like to draw your attention to the top rightmost high-resolution scan featuring the silicon 2P and the magnesium 2S peaks. I've highlighted the initial olivine magnesium 2S peak before any alteration, and the second peak where the group decided to irradiate their olivine samples with 4 keV argon ions and then soak them in water and then compare the magnesium abundance before and after irradiation and soaking. They decided to quantify magnesium abundance by comparing the band areas of the magnesium 2S peak that you can see experience a notable decrease in band height, and the silicon 2P peak, which you can see was relatively unchanged by irradiation and soaking. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you very much. They also found that with more heavily space-weathered samples, so as they increase the irradiation fluence, the samples are more susceptible to alteration from sample preparation. I'd like to point out that this crosshatch area that you see in this plot is the range of initial magnesium to silicon ratio that they observed in their samples, whereas the plot points that you see is the magnesium to silicon ratio after irradiation and then soaking. And you can see what with higher fluence of around the order of 10 to the 18 argon ions per centimeter squared, there is a notable decrease in that MGSI ratio. So as the sample is further irradiated, it is more susceptible to magnesium depletion after soaking. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we care about this because we have discussed in several previous talks that some return samples contain olivine, and samples from near-Earth asteroids like Itokawa, Ryugu, Bennu have experienced extensive solar wind irradiation. And if they do contain olivine, which we've seen that they do, they could be susceptible to chemical alteration if exposed to water. But obviously, olivine isn't the only minerals that are present in these return samples. And I would like to note this is a picture of some of the return samples from OSIRIS-REx and the spectra of some of those samples that there has been reported presence of phyllosilicates in these samples. Next slide, please. So this study would like to expand on Contando et al.'s 2008 study and see if space-weathered serpentine minerals of phyllosilicate experience a similar magnesium depletion effect. We're especially interested in serpentine minerals because serpentine minerals are derived from olivine through a process referred to as serpentinization. So it wouldn't be unlikely that a serpentine mineral may experience a similar magnesium depletion effect. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also used X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy to study the magnesium abundance of lizardite and twin sisters olivine samples. I'd like to note that we used twin sisters olivine samples and studied those as well in order to replicate Contando et al.'s results. On the left is an image of our phi surface analysis system that we have here at Flagstaff, Arizona, that we used to conduct X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy in addition to ion irradiation. Our phi surface analysis analysis system operates at a base pressure of 10 to the minus 9 torr. And for our study, we chose to use helium ions to simulate solar wind irradiation to further study whether there's a difference in ions. And the top right is an image of one of our twin sisters olivine samples, and the bottom right is an image of a sample of lizardite. We decided to focus on one particular kind of mineral in the serpentine family. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we first prepared our samples for XPS analysis. We broke those big rocks that I just showed you into relatively 3 mm sized piece in order to be small enough to perform XPS. And then we washed our samples in a ultrasonic bath in a triple wash cycle. The samples were first washed with acetone and then washed with isopropyl alcohol and then finally rinsed in water. After they were sufficiently dried, they were mounted onto our sample stages that we use for XPS analysis. On the very far right, that is an image of one of our sample stages that is about 1 centimeter in diameter, and we mounted the samples onto that sample stage using carbon tape. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a diagram of our process. I've highlighted sections that were performed in ultra-high vacuum. So we first inserted our samples into our surface analysis system and performed initial analysis. We performed a survey scan and a high-resolution scan, focusing on peaks of interest. We then irradiated our samples to a pre-specified fluence with 4 keV helium ions. And then immediately after irradiation, we took another survey scan as well as a high-resolution scan. We then removed the samples from the analysis chamber to soak them in high-performance liquid chromatography water. And then after soaking, we returned them to the analysis chamber for a final X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy survey and high-resolution scan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our preliminary results indicate that space-weathered lizardite experiences magnesium depletion after soaking, similar to olivine. So all of this data is from one experiment where a grain of lizardite was irradiated to an order of 10 to the 17 ions per centimeter squared. On the left is our survey scan, where the black line represents our very initial data of this lizardite sample. The red represents the scan immediately after irradiation, and the blue represents the survey scan after soaking and returning the sample to the chamber. I've highlighted some peaks of interest, and I would like to note that the carbon 1s peak that you see in the initial survey as well as the post-soak survey is indicative of adventitious carbon from the sample being just in the Earth's atmosphere that is normal to see in an XPS scan. But as you can see in the irradiated survey, that adventitious carbon is removed with irradiation. And on the right is our high resolution scan. Again, black is our initial spectra. Red is immediately after irradiation, and blue is after soaking our samples. So I've highlighted the silicon 2p and magnesium 2s peaks. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that even immediately after irradiation, the magnesium 2s peak remains relatively unchanged. So we would not expect that irradiation alone is inducing this magnesium depletion effect, but you can see from the decrease in the peak height in the post-soak magnesium 2s that it seems to be the act of soaking that induces the magnesium depletion. Next slide, please.
5 minutes.
Thank you. So these are our preliminary results. I don't have error bars yet because I am in the process of repeating our experiments, but I'd like to note that our experiments are so far very reproducible. But we also found that magnesium depletion increases with increasing irradiation fluence in lizardite as well as olivine. So again, that gray highlighted section is the range of our initial MGSI. In our lizardite and olivine samples, we were able to replicate Contando et al.'s results that with increasing irradiation fluence, there is a decrease in that MGSI or an increase in magnesium depletion. And I'd like to especially note that it's interesting that while at maximal depletion, the MGSI sits at around 0.9 for our olivine samples, in lizardite, at maximal depletion, it reaches an MGSI of about 0.5, which we're not 100% sure, but likely is due to the difference in the mineral structure between lizardite and olivine. But this is to say that it is evident that lizardite also experiences a magnesium depletion effect. We obviously haven't worked through every single serpentine mineral, and we don't know if other phyllosilicates besides serpentines behave in the exact same way when it comes to being irradiated with charged ions or solar wind irradiation, but it is likely that if return samples that do contain these minerals are soaked in water or come into contact with water, that there will be some surface alteration that would change their composition from what it would be in situ. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. I've included my contact info as well as the contact information of my PI and advisor and a link to our laboratory website. Thank you very much for your time.